But as a managing editor, do you like look at every script, every page of artwork, pencils, inks, colors, or do you kind of like have other people who are involved in that kind of process, or what's your process like when you're doing editing?
It differs somewhat between different types of projects. I think I learned pretty well an old school approach from Dark Horse because they go back to the beginning, creator owned, and they have followed certain patterns in how they do things, and I'm really grateful for watching that process with them. I'm fairly detail oriented and maybe even a little obsessive, so I tended to follow every step of every project as far as I can. And right now, Waxwork is still pretty small, so I'm going to have my hand in all of the books. I might not always be the person who looked at the original pitch. That might have come down from the owners or from somebody else, but by the time we're looking at an outline, then I'll be involved at that stage.
Yeah.
And just... Would you like me to walk through the steps?
Yeah, I'd love to.
Okay, well, this is the same kind of thing you might hear if you go to a panel about like editing comics. I've heard really good editors talk about it. But the basic steps after pitching and after contracts and deals have been made on a story or a series, this is how I do it. I expect an outline to be created by the creative team, and it could be multiple contributors to the outline, like the artist and the writer could both contribute. Once we agree that the outline makes sense and has a logical flow to it that looks like it will work as a comic story, and the reader is the one we're serving the most, will the reader be able to follow this and be satisfied by it? We move on to a rough draft of a script, and there'll be a due date where that needs to come in, because from the very beginning of the project, there is a timeline established of what we hope will be the beginning and end of that project. So the rough draft of the script will be due at a certain point. It'll be my job to send notes back within a certain time frame so that the script can be revised again by the writer, even if it's small notes or big notes. And that'll be pretty fast because we work on a pretty fast schedule at Waxwork. The writer will turn it around, they'll bring back another version, and hopefully it'll be an approved version. It's one that I can say, okay, this is done. Now for House of Waxwork, those stories are owned by Waxwork once they're commissioned and paid for. So I represent the kind of quality control on do we approve that script? Is it something we're comfortable publishing at that point? For the creator-owned, I would say there's a little bit more leeway. If I give notes on a script and the creators come back and say, well, no, we really wanted to do it this way, and let's talk about that, I might be more willing to sort of hear them out, maybe consider dropping some of the notes or keeping some of the notes. So there's more of a negotiation kind of process. I just think psychologically that should be true because when it's a creator-owned project...
They have that sense of, it's my baby and I have this idea and it's a little bit off the wall and I kind of want it to like explore. Like I know the rules. It's good to know the rules, but it's also good to know when to break the rules and try to experiment, because that's kind of how growth happens in a really weird way when you kind of get to that point. If you had the same story over and over again without ever trying to break the rules or change anything up, it would end up with the same kind of story. So it's important to push the envelope.
That can happen. I think that's kind of a syndrome. Some of the publishers over the years, you'll notice certain time periods or runs of comics that there's a cookie cutter aspect to them, and that's not good, right?
No, definitely not.
I'm really interested in innovation in comics, and I read a lot of weird indie comics and art comics and stuff, and I try to give people the benefit of the doubt. I want to try something really wacky, as long as it's not closing the door on the reader. I don't want someone who's a casual comics reader to suddenly feel discouraged, like, I don't understand comics after reading a certain story, because then they might not ever read comics again, you know what I mean? You got to throw them a bit of a lifeline. So I'm looking for those issues that might arise, but beyond that, I'm all about like allowing people to try weird stuff in their comics if they can.
100%, because you never know what your audience is going to be, and like you never know like what you're gonna go after. Like you can be like, oh, I'm gonna try writing horror, and be like, horror, I didn't really find like the people for horror, but I'm gonna start writing like superhero books and find someone who's like, oh cool, like superhero books is where I've really found my voice and I can write those because that's what I grew up reading, and that's what, for whatever reason it can work that way. Yeah,
I think creators really need to try different things that way, even if they're crashingly failed attempts, because you learn from that.
Absolutely.
And it's also really funny when a book comes out and the creators think it's one genre or one sort of thing, and fans respond to it as something other. Have you ever noticed that happen? Like someone thinks it's a mystery or sci-fi and they're like, this is a horror book.
Yeah, you're like, okay.
Yeah, but you kind of go with it, right?
Yeah,
because
exactly.
if you find your audience, right?
That's what it's about. It's so funny how that works. It's really interesting because in comic books, I feel like everyone fails. Everyone is like, oh, I put out this book, no one read it. It's a struggle, and then you kind of fail forward in a way, and you kind of find yourself, and you're like, okay, and all you need is that one success, that one book to be like, okay, yeah, Hannah from House of Waxwork, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, cool, yeah, they kind of have a brand, they have an identity, and then now everyone in the community knows that you do horror books, and you are now a name in horror,
Yeah.
And so it's so cool how that growth kind of happens and that successes.
I think you had asked me, and I didn't really answer how I ended up with the job at Waxwork.
Yeah.
And the answer was, having been at Dark Horse, and then I often would be reviewing horror books or interviewing people about horror books, and somehow that stuck, and they thought, she's a horror person. and my only response is, I'm all good with that.
Yeah.
Let's do that. And there's two other publishers I work for also kind of spin in that same direction, because I ended up doing a book with Black Mask Studios, which is coming up this autumn. That's an occult themed series. And I'm working now with Heavy Metal Magazine.
Oh, wow, that's awesome.
Also, I quite horror influenced and darker stuff, and also with the music connection, because House of Waxwork has the music connection. So I think that's how it all kind of keeps on leading to new stuff, and all of that, people are thinking of me as that person who does that horror stuff. So I'm good with it.